Welcome to toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi, and in today's video we're going to be trying to replicate the bag that comes with the Last Crusade version of the Indiana Jones figure from the retro wave from Kenner. Now recently you'll have seen me review these figures. Kenner have been reproducing lots of the old Adventures of Indiana Jones figures, and they've made a few new versions of him, including, as you can see here, we've got the Temple of Doom version, and at the back we have the Last Crusade version of him. But only one of them comes with a bag, and that is the Last Crusade version of Indy. As you can see here, he comes with the bag that you see him with in every movie, and I thought it would be quite nice to actually make other versions of this bag to go with the other figures. I was thinking about buying multiple versions of this figure just to get the bag, but he's about £14, this figure, and just for that one accessory that seems quite a lot of money. So making my own version seemed like a sensible way of going, and I think we can actually use this version here to make little casts of and get something that looks pretty close to this, and it shouldn't take too much work, and I can do it with everything that I already have here in my toolbox. So let's take a look at the bag that we need to copy. As you can see here, this is the bag, and it's the one accessory I really wish that they had put with every figure, every version of Indy, because it's such a useful thing and it really does finish off the look of that figure. As you can see though, it's fairly simple. We've got a little bit of a bag here with some very minor details in it. The back of it is fairly plain, and then we have this strap that goes over the shoulder, again with small amounts of detail just where it attaches to the main part of the bag. So my plan is to actually cast the sort of center part of the bag, or make a mold from this so that we can make it out of milliput, and then the strap I'm going to make out of either a very thin sheet of styrene or maybe some EVA foam or a little bit of fabric, something like that, so it's got a little bit of flex to it, and then we can just stick those pieces on, paint everything up, and we should end up with some pretty reasonable looking bags. And as I say, this is something I can do with tools and equipment that I already have here at toy-polloi. I've shown this stuff before. This is called blue stuff. It's a thermoplastic. Basically you put it into just boiled water, it softens down, and then you can push items into it, let it sort of cool down, and you'll get a mold. You can see here these are some molds that I've made previously, so we're going to be using that to make a mold of the sort of main part of the bag, and then we'll use milliput, push milliput into that to make sort of little castings of that mold. Hopefully we'll get something that looks like this bag. As you can see, the back is plain, so it's only the front that we have to worry about. So let's warm this stuff up. You essentially boil the kettle, put it into some water and let it sort of soften. It softens really quickly, and then once you take it out of the water you can push things into it and make molds, let it cool down, and we can then get to work with it. So let's warm this stuff up and see what we can make. So you can see after just a sort of few minutes it starts to soften. This is not fully softened because it was fairly thick, but I can start to mould it about. So I'll just loosen that up a bit, put it back in the water. You have to be very careful, obviously it is just boiled water, so it's very warm. I'll take another piece out and we can see what that one's like. It's really strange stuff, but it's really useful. So you can see this one has gone pretty soft as well. That's actually not too bad, that one. Just get everything sort of warmed up, and then we can start moulding. Essentially you just push it in, let it cool off, and you'll get a little mould. You can see it's that simple. But yeah, let's get everything fully warmed up and then we'll do some properly. Okay, so this stuff feels like it's warmed up really fully. So I'm just going to try and make some smooth surfaces on it just by folding it over like that, and then we'll push this in. I'll do it on a flat surface just so that we can get all of the details and stuff around it. And I'm not too worried about the back because that's the bit that will be hidden, and we can just sort of file that down anyway and shape it. But as long as we get the front section right, that's good. So I've now got to let that cool. I'm going to keep doing this. I'm actually going to make 4 moulds because then it gives me more options. You know, if things go wrong, if the milliput doesn't cast quite properly, I just have sort of options to work with. So yeah, let's make 4 of these and then we'll see what we can do. And there we go, that's 4 fairly crude moulds made. Basically once the mould has sort of cooled off enough, it doesn't have to cool off fully, you can just gently sort of take the item out. If you want a really sort of sharp mould, I would just suggest leaving it in until it's properly cooled. But as I'm making 4 in quick succession, I'm trying to sort of do these fairly roughly, but those look pretty good. I can actually see some detail of the bag left on the inside of that. So I'm now going to let those cool fully. Then I'm going to mix up some milliput and we'll push that into the mould, try and keep the back nice and flat, but it's the front detail we're worried about. Let that set overnight, and then we can see exactly what we've managed to make. I'm hoping we'll get a pretty good representation of the main part of this bag. Now we can get to casting. So I've got myself some milliput here, which I've shown many times before on the channel. It's a 2-part modelling clay. Basically you get the 2 parts, cut equal amounts of them, mix them together, then you can push them into the mould, and it takes about 24 hours to set. Once that's all set, you can then sort of file it and sand it down. So I'll just mix up some of this, push it into the moulds, and we'll leave this till tomorrow. Then we can see how well the casts have taken, and hopefully we can make some bags from them.
P-O-Y, P-O-L-L-O-Y. That is incorrect. Try again.
It's now been a couple of hours since I put the milliput in. It's an ideal time to actually take these out of the mould before they set fully, and then I can trim up some of the edges as well before, again, the milliput is sort of fully hardened. So I'm just going to carefully pop these out. They're still a little bit sort of flexible, so you do have to be a bit careful at doing this, but they're firm enough that you should be able to get them out without damaging them. So there we go, that's the one of them out. It's looking really nice. You can see there's quite a lot of detail sort of gone through onto the milliput from the mould, but as you can see there's a lot of excess, so I'm just going to trim that off carefully, and then we'll let them set fully, and then I'll do the final sort of tidying up tomorrow when everything has had a full time, sort of 24 hours to set. But I'm really happy with how these are looking so far. They look very good. It's now 24 hours later and these have had time to set, and they are looking really nice. I'm very happy with these. So I've just got to do a little bit of filing and sanding just to take off some of the rough edges where the mould hasn't quite worked. And I'm also going to cut off these little sort of tab parts which are where the original strap was attached, because I've made myself a quick prototype. And you can see here that this is my new strap, so we need to modify just that mould slightly. So let me get these all trimmed down, and then we can start adding the new strap that I've made. But overall, these have worked really well. Just a tiny amount of sanding and filing, and they'll be perfect. Now we come on to making the strap, and on these bags obviously it's a thin piece of this sort of rubbery plastic, so you can bend it and sort of move it quite easily, and it's got a slight curve to it, so it's slightly angled away from the back of the bag. And I was thinking that there's a few ways that we could go about this. I was initially thinking that we could use some of this EVA sort of modelling foam. I've got this stuff which is pretty thin. This is about sort of half a mil thick, and I did cut some thin strips of that just to see what it was like. So here's a thin strip of it, and it's not too bad. It's got a bit of stretch to it, but you can see it's very easily broken. I just have to pull that and it snaps very easily. So my next plan, and that's what I've made my little mock-up out of, is to use some 0.5mm styrene sheet. So this is really quite thin stuff, and you can cut it pretty thin as well. So this is a sort of thin strip of it, and this is ideal because look, you can bend it like that. It does have the problem that if you bend it too far and pinch it, it will sort of fold, but if you're a bit sort of careful with it, you can get something that looks like this. And this, I'm only planning to put these on display. I think this is going to work well. So this is what we're going to use. We're going to be using this 0.5mm styrene sheet, and I've just got to cut some thin strips off of it. I did measure roughly how thick this band is, and it's just about 2mm. So I'm going to just cut this by eye and cut it as thin as I possibly can. I'll cut myself a few strips, then we can start sticking it on. I've also added a tiny little bit of detail, because if you look at this original bag, there's a little latch or a little sort of a clip there on the side that's just been moulded in. So I made myself a very tiny one there, and that just gives it that extra bit of detail. By the time that's painted, that should look really nice. So let's get these straps added. So here is the 0.5mm thick styrene sheet. I'm just going to get a ruler, and I'm going to cut some strips off that are about 2mm wide, but I'm just doing this by eye. Now the length of this strap is about 7.5cm, so I just need to cut some strips of this into that 7.5cm length. I will use my cutting mats ruler here just to measure that quickly. It doesn't have to be particularly accurate. These are all going to be slightly different, these bags, so let's just cut some of those. So that's a 7.5cm length. Do the same on this one. And then that one as well. That's all three pieces then cut. Like so. We now need to attach these strips to the little bags. We can't use plastic weld in this instance because this is milliput, it's not a plastic, so we're going to be using super glue. And you can see just by the nature of cutting this plastic, it's added a slight curve to it, and that's actually an advantage to us because it means that we can attach this to the bag and it will have the same sort of slight curve that the original one has. So all you've got to do is line this up the right way. So you can see we've got the curve here. We turn it around that way. If we attach it to the side of the bag, that side, and then attach it to the other side, you can see we get a similar curve to that original bag. So it's a little bit of a sort of a bonus that that has happened. To attach it, I'm going to be using some super glue. I'll just place a little bit on a piece of paper here, and then I will apply this with a dotter just so that I've got lots of control. So put a little bit of super glue like that. Then I have this tool which is called a dotter. So these are sort of little metal prongs with balls on the end. All you've got to do, grab a little bit of that onto the end of the dotter. We can put that onto the end of this piece of styrene, and I can attach it to the bag. We'll let one side dry, and then we'll bend this over and attach the other side. It feels like it's gone off. Again, just get a small amount of super glue, put it on the other end. Rotate that round. Attach it in place without gluing my finger to it. There we go, that's looking pretty good. I'll do the other two, we'll let that dry properly. I'm going to do a little bit of sort of fine tuning to the end. I'm going to shape that just with a knife just to give it a little bit more of a sort of finished look, because at the moment you can see it clearly is just a piece of styrene stuck on, but I can shape that a bit just with a knife. But the overall effect is very good, and if we compare it to the original bag, we're starting to get something that really does match Now the final detail I wanted to add is this little buckle, and I've just done this quickly off camera. I essentially cut some small squares of the strip that I made for the bag, and I've just glued them in place there just with a tiny amount of super glue, and I've used a pair of tweezers just to sort of line them up. It just adds that little bit of interest. I might give this a quick sand just to take off some of the sharp edges, but as you can see, just adding that little detail just makes it look a little bit more interesting. By the time that's painted, I think it will blend in very nicely. It would probably be a good idea at this stage to actually give them a test fit and see if they work on the character. So here is the Temple of Doom version of Indy. I'll just grab one of these bags. We can drop it over his head and see if that fits. Yeah, that's working really well. That's pretty close to that original one. I think by the time that is painted up, it's going to look very nice. Let's try it on one of my custom map room versions of Indy. So let's grab another of these bags, drop it over his head, fit that on. Yeah, again, it's a really good fit. I'm very happy with how that's turned out. So let's give these some paint. I am going to quickly give these a sort of an undercoat or a prime with some spray primer. It's probably not necessary to do that. I could just paint straight on with some acrylic paints, but the weather's nice outside and I have some of the spray primer ready, so I'm just going to give them a quick coat anyway, and then we'll get sort of putting some colour on and see how they look when they're finished. But so far, that's really quite convincing. Now that the undercoat has had time to set, we can get to painting it the proper colours. So I'm going to go for the sort of green of the bag. It's a sort of camo green, and I've already mixed up some colours and I've got a match that I'm pretty happy with. So I've used some of this game colour. This is called Beastly Brown 72.043. I've mixed that with a rather large amount of this olive colour, olive green, which is Vallejo 70.967, and that gave me a pretty good sort of camo colour, but it was a little bit bright, so I've just added a small amount of black to that, and you can see here this is the colour I've come up with. I'm very happy with that as a match. It's as close as I'm going to get. So let's paint the bag part first. We'll let that dry and then we'll paint the strap, which is essentially just a sort of a plain brown. I can probably just use that beastly brown colour to match that, but let's get the bags painted first, let those dry, and then we can hold on to the bags while we're painting the straps. Now that's had time to dry, I'm very happy with that. It's not a perfect match, a little bit darker, but I think it will work really well. So I'm going to now paint the straps. I've mixed up that same beastly brown, but I've added a little bit of black and a little bit of white just to sort of make it a bit grayer. And I think that's going to match quite well. It sort of matches the tone that I've gone for on the bag. So let's just paint these straps. And then once that's all dry, we'll give them a top coat, a clear top coat with a satin varnish, just to finish everything off. But you can see that they're really starting to look like those bags now. Right, the paint has had time to dry. You can see that top coat just gives it that little bit of a sheen to it, and it really brings out the detail that you can see in the bag there. The straps actually work really quite well once they're painted. That little extra bit of detail there just makes them look less like a strip of styrene, and I'm very happy with how these have sort of finished up. They look a lot closer to the original one than I had sort of hoped that they would. But let's try them on the figure. So I'll bring in my Temple of Doom version of Indy. You can just drop that over his head. And there you go. Immediately that figure looks a whole lot better. I wish that Hasbro had given this figure the bag in the first place. Without it, it just looks like a fairly sort of average figure. With it, it immediately looks a lot more like Indiana Jones. We can also put it onto one of my sort of custom map room versions of Indy. If you haven't checked out the video on those, then please do. I'll put a link to that in the description. So we can just drop that over. And again, that just finishes that figure off. It just makes him look like he should have done in the movie. So that's a nice little addition there. We can also add it onto the normal version of Indiana Jones. Now the original version of Indy, the original Kenner version, didn't come with a bag, but it would have been quite nice when they sort of upgraded these for the retro collection that they just added one on. So I'm going to do that now. I think it just finishes him off. So you've got the bag, you've got the whip, and you've got the gun, and it's all looking a whole lot better. I just think it's a shame that Kenner didn't sort of go all the way with these figures. They did the bare minimum to them, and I think just this one simple accessory was all that was needed to bring a lot of these figures sort of to that next level. And now you can see how simple it is to make it. All you've got to do is buy yourself the Last Crusade version, and you can then make as many as you want. I think I'm going to make a few more of these because I actually have a few more Indy figures that could do with them. So now that I've got these 4, I will produce a few more as well. And there we go, that is it for this project. As you can see, adding bags to the Indy figures makes them look a whole lot better. And as I've said many times before, I really wish that Hasbro Kenner had bothered to give the bags to some of the modern retro figures that they've been bringing out. The Temple of Doom figure version of Indy really needed this badly, and just by adding it, he's a much better looking figure. So it's certainly well worth doing. And as you've seen, it's a fairly straightforward process. All the tools are things that I have and use regularly in my videos, so you'll have seen me use the blue stuff and milliput and all sorts of bits of styrene in my general fixing video. So they're very useful things to have if you want to fix up toys. Hopefully this video has been of interest to you. If it has, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video. And thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.